Hey, everybody, and welcome back. It seems like everywhere you turn these days, immigration is a hot topic, and it's one that a lot of Christians struggle with.
Yeah, trying to figure out what the Bible actually says about it can be tricky.
So that's why we're going to be taking a deep dive into Mike Winger's work on this.
Hmm.
He does a really great job of looking at what the Bible says about immigration and kind of going beyond those surface-level interpretations that we often hear.
It's so true. He starts by calling out this tendency we see on both sides of the political spectrum. They're kind of proof texting,
Right.
picking and choosing certain verses to support their pre-existing views on immigration.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You see people shouting, "Love thy neighbor," to argue for completely open borders.
And then others are using verses about national security as a way to shut down any conversation about welcoming immigrants.
It's almost like they're trying to use the Bible as their own personal political handbook.
Exactly. And the problem is these simplistic interpretations can be really dangerous. The Bible's not a simple rule book, and yanking verses out of context can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings.
Okay, so how does Winger suggest we approach this? Does he think the Bible offers any guidance at all?
He does, but he really encourages a deeper understanding. He dives into the Old Testament to see how Israel dealt with foreigners, but makes it clear that we can't just copy and paste those ancient laws onto modern nations. Israel's situation was unique. Their laws about immigrants were directly tied to their special covenant with God.
So we can't just say, well, the Israelites did this, so we should too.
Exactly. But Winger argues that we can still glean some timeless principles from their example. He breaks down the different types of foreigners they encountered: sojourners, who settled in their land long-term,
Okay.
travelers just passing through, and then invaders who had hostile intentions. So obviously the rules and expectations would be different for each group.
It's starting to sound like it's a lot more complex than just welcome everyone or keep everyone out.
Way more nuanced. But one thing that stands out, regardless of which type of foreigner it was, is this constant emphasis on showing compassion. Winger highlights several key verses that commanded Israel to treat foreigners with kindness and fairness.
Right, like those verses in Exodus chapters 22 and 23, where God tells them not to mistreat foreigners because they were once foreigners themselves,
Yeah.
oppressed in Egypt.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like this powerful call to empathy, to remember what it feels like to be the outsider.
Yes. And it's not just about avoiding mistreatment, it's about actively extending kindness. Leviticus 19:3-4 even says to treat foreigners as native-born citizens. That was a pretty radical concept for that time period,
Yeah.
showing this deep understanding of shared humanity and recognizing that everyone deserves dignity and respect.
Winger's not afraid to talk about the tough stuff either, like the exploitation of immigrants, especially the issue of underpayment.
Oh, for sure.
He sees that as a clear violation of biblical ethics.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying compassion's not just about welcoming people in. It's about ensuring they're treated fairly and justly once they're here.
That's a really crucial point. True compassion goes beyond just warm feelings. It requires action and a commitment to protecting the vulnerable. And this leads us to a question that often comes up. How do we balance this call for compassion with the need for boundaries? It's a tension a lot of people feel when it comes to immigration.
It's interesting because Winger does seem to differentiate between what he calls sustainable immigration and the kind of mass migration that could overwhelm a nation. He even points to Deuteronomy chapter 7,
Yeah.
where God tells the Israelites to drive out certain nations for the sake of preserving their own culture and beliefs.
Right, and that passage often gets misconstrued as an endorsement for xenophobia. But Winger argues that it was a specific situation. God was protecting Israel from being influenced by those nations' practices that directly conflicted with God's commands and their covenant with him.
So it's not like this blanket endorsement of just closing borders or rejecting anyone who's different.
Not at all. It highlights this need for discernment, recognizing that different circumstances require different approaches.
This makes me think about the concept of assimilation. Winger mentions Exodus 12:4-9, which seems to indicate that there should be one law for both native-born citizens and sojourners.
Yeah, suggesting a need for some level of integration.
Right.
What's fascinating is that it kind of hints at the importance of cultural unity and shared values within a nation. But of course, it's not as simple as saying everyone needs to become exactly the same.
And to complicate things further, he points to Deuteronomy 23, which places restrictions on certain groups entering Israel
Yeah.
based on past conflicts and hostilities.
Yeah.
It's like recognizing that history and current realities play a role in shaping immigration policies.
It's clear that finding the right balance is key. Winger advocates for this nuanced approach that considers both the needs of immigrants and the well-being of the host nation.
So where do we go from here? How do we apply these ancient principles to our modern world and grapple with the practical implications of immigration in a way that honors both biblical values and the realities of our current situation?
That's the million-dollar question, and that's what we'll be unpacking the next part of our deep dive.